Captured effortlessly, that's the way it was. Happened so naturally, I did not know it was love. The next thing I felt was you holding me close. What was I gonna do? I let myself go, and now we're flying through the stars. I hope this night will last forever. Oh, 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 oh. Ain't nobody loves me better, makes me happy, makes me feel this way.
Hi, this is John Cullen. Welcome to another episode of Hypothetically Speaking. In this episode, I'm joined by Kurtis Bay, and Kurtis has a story to share with the audience that I thought was really important. And so, Kurtis, thanks for coming on the show and taking time to share with us your personal experience with this pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to visit about this. I think it's important for everybody as well.
So why don't you sort of share with us a bit of the background, your story, what you've been through, and how you and I got connected, because I think we got connected through some recent events, so that people can kind of put this all together.
Yeah. So early background this year, the actual event that took place was around December 23rd. My wife and I went to a Christmas party. As usual, every Christmas we met with the family and some other friends, close-knit group of people, 40 or 50. Had our normal good time. Drove home that night. Next morning, woke up, felt like a little bit of a hangover, but neither one of us drank. So we figured it was just we're old and that we stayed out too late. So kind of took it easy that day, didn't do a whole heck of a lot. Next day was Christmas, 25th. We made it over that morning to our kids to watch our grandkids open their gifts and celebrate Christmas with all of us together. Another ritual and tradition that we've done for years. So went through that. We weren't feeling all that great on the 25th, but both of us felt like, it was just, again, maybe just overexerted ourselves on the 23rd, having a great time with everybody. There was a lot of dancing and a lot of singing. Mm-hmm. So we had a really good time. That night came home, kind of chilled. Didn't feel like anything out of the ordinary. The next day on the 26th, we both kind of felt like, wow, this has been going on now for a couple of days where we've had this tinge of something bothering us, and felt like, well, maybe we did get a hold of something with all those people there.
Now, was this 2000? This is 2020 or 2019?
Yeah, actually, this is 2021, John.
Okay.
So this was just this last December Christmas. It was the word was on the street and in all the news media and everything like that was Omicron running wild in around Christmas time, et cetera. So we kind of thought that maybe that had occurred, but we weren't sure. Both of us had COVID early 2019 or late 2019, early 2020, before it was a thing. We had we called it the sleeping disease that time when we got it. It felt kind of a bronchial flu-like infection, and we were down for 20 or 30 days, kind of fatigued, but still working and things like that. But we knew what we had once it became public. So we heard the Omicron thing. We didn't think much about it. We had antibodies earlier in 2020. John, her mother-in-law contracted COVID in Vancouver, Washington. And if you remember, Seattle was one of the first diagnosis of COVID death up in Seattle. And we were just a few hours away in Vancouver. Her parents in their 80s were with the rest of their family on a camping trip. There's probably 15 or 20 of them all together. All of them were sick. But her mom was not doing well and hadn't been doing well for several days, over a week. And they called me and asked me if they brought her back, would I take her to the hospital? They were, intimately scared about what was going on in the media, and they didn't know what was going on, but they figured she must have it. I took her to the hospital there locally. We went through the experience of, I was with her for 3 or 4 hours in the room. I got up to go to the bathroom. They locked the door behind me, wouldn't let me return into the room, and told me that she had COVID. And I said, well, I kind of guessed she did. Yeah. But they said, well, this is a death sentence for someone her age. She had a lot of underlying health conditions, 5 or 6 stents. She had some organ issues and things like that. So it was very compromised for her. And 7 days later, she was dead. So we had the experience. We both had antibodies. Neither one of us got sick during that period, while the rest of our family did. We felt very confident that we were in good shape. We were both healthy. Neither one of us drank, did drugs, smoked, or anything like that. So bumping into Omicron didn't seem like a significant fear of ours. And based on everything we'd heard, it was a flu, nothing to worry about. We both were busy on the 26th and 27th. She had a small business refurbishing estate furniture and stuff. She loved to go to estate sales, and it was a hobby that turned into a small business called the Eclectic Flamingo. For a lot of other reasons we can get into on another time, but that meant something to her. And the Eclectic Flamingo kept her busy, usually a couple hours a day. And so she was off doing some things on the 26th and 27th. 28th, she returned and told me that she wasn't feeling all that great, just a little fatigued. A couple days had gone by and everything was good. I went and got fitted for a brand new set of PXG golf clubs in Phoenix. I was feeling pretty good. Our kids had sent us a picture of their COVID-19 positive test from the 26th. So we knew that everybody that was at the party probably had it, or someone had it and was shedding. But the bottom line was we were doing pretty good, and we're not suffering tremendously at all. In fact, like I said, I went and got fitted, for an hour swinging a golf club. Never felt like I was being impacted at all. And she came home that night, 28th, and said that she was, fatigued after being out in her shopping and working on some of her projects. Didn't think much of it. We've been together for almost 40 years. We were married for 37 years. We kind of knew how to take care of each other. So we did the normal thing: vitamin C, some chicken noodle soup, lots of fluids, Pedialyte, etc. And just felt like she'll be bounced back tomorrow. It's not that big of a deal. The 29th and 30th came, same activity schedule again, but the 30th, she didn't leave the house. She was a very active person, walked several miles a day, hiked in the mountains where we live, and she just wasn't going to leave the house that day. She said she was just going to chill out and watch TV. It was the 30th, not a big deal. Didn't think much of it. I went about my business.
She's not like burning up with a big fever or anything like that?
No fever, John. And she wasn't complaining of oxygen deprivation or the only thing that she complained about was fatigue, and never once complained about being able to breathe or anything. The 31st, that evening, we decided not to go out anywhere. We would just hang out. She said, yeah, can we just hang out at the house? Yeah, you bet. We no need to go out and celebrate. We're old anyway. So, she was 59, I'm 58. We thought we'd just hang out and stay at the house and celebrate New Year's that way. I'm not sure either one of us made it to the next day, but we were asleep probably before New Year's set in. The first came and went. We got up, had breakfast, did our normal routine. She bathed. We got in the pool later that evening, got in the hot tub. She said she still wasn't feeling well, and I made a comment that, babe, I need you to get better. Something's not right here. If this is still going on, something's not right. And she said, no, I'm trying. I feel good, but I'm tired. And didn't think much of it, honestly. That we weren't concerned. Honestly, we were not concerned at all, and we weren't. I'm a pretty smart guy, I'd like to think, but we just was not putting the pieces together that maybe there was something else more challenging than what we were dealing with. So the third came, January 3rd came, and she was super fatigued that day. She stayed in her pajamas the entire day, and asked me to make her some homemade chicken noodle soup. I did. We sat and visited a little bit. I ran some errands, came back, and I told her if she wasn't doing better by the next day, I was gonna have to take her somewhere. At the time, we had recently relocated back to Arizona. For background, we moved here in '92 and lived here, raised our family, went back to Vancouver, Washington in 2010, so she could reunite with her family. We'd been gone for 20 years. They, didn't see us much, but maybe once a year. So she wanted to reestablish relationships, and that made sense. I had sold my company. We didn't need to be in Arizona anymore. So we went back to Vancouver, which was good because her mom passed that in 2020. She was able to reconnect with her family and do exactly what she wanted to do. And in 2021, with all the fiasco in Washington State, all the mandates, the governor was out of control, the Oregon governor was out of control. We just decided to come back to Arizona where there was at least some space for acting normal. Schools were not closed down 100%. Masks were not a mandate problem necessarily. There were spots where people did, different companies, but not, statewide. So we came back in 2021, and we hadn't established any kind of primary care. So it just wasn't a priority for us, John. We were living our best life. We were following our grandkids around. We had just bought our forever home in the mountains we wanted to live in. And so it wasn't something we were concerned about. All of a sudden we're faced with, we need a doctor probably. And so the next morning, on the 5th, actually, I got her up and we walked out to my car, and I told her we were going to go to the urgent care down the road, which is just a couple miles away. Got there at about 7:30 in the morning. They weren't open. We both had coffee and we were visiting, and she was totally lucid, not fighting for air or anything like that. But I said, hey, I need some more coffee. They're not open. Let's go get some coffee. Didn't know the area all that well because, again, we hadn't been here back in this area where we were living now for very long. I drove around a couple streets, inadvertently turned down one street, and there was a huge emergency sign in a hospital there. I didn't know it existed, and we weren't prepared. That wasn't our goal. But as we turned down the street, she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're going to take me to the emergency room." And I can remember specifically thinking, "Man, how did we get to here?" "No, I wasn't going to take you to the emergency room, Tam." And she said, "Well, I think that's probably where I'm going to end up, babe." And again, it was very challenging because I'd been with her for all these days, and this wasn't something that I was expecting to have happen. I thought we'd go to the urgent care, we'd get some monoclonal antibodies if needed, and we'd come home and everything would be fine. I took her, I said, "Are you sure you want to go there?" She said, "I think I probably need to." So I took her to the emergency room. We got out, went in, her oxygen O2 was around 79, somewhere in that area.
Wow. And this may have been going on for a while. So if she's at 79, yes, she might have been at 80 for a day, or 80 in the 80s for a day. So she's been hypoxic. Yeah. She's been hypoxic for some time. And yet she doesn't have a fever. She doesn't have a fever.
No.
She's not burning up.
No.
Now, do you mind if I ask you if you guys have been inoculated? Do you mind if I ask that?
Yeah, we were not.
Okay, so no inoculations at all. So whatever's happening to her is purely organic, and you guys know that you had COVID before.
Yeah, and that was the reason, not because we were any kind of anti-vax, there was no political position for us or anything like that.
Got it, right.
We had it. I had been around her mom, Tammy had been around her mom during that period. We were confident that, and my neighbors had it. We'd had so many interactions with people that had it. It didn't affect us. Yeah. So the last thing we thought of was, even if we did get it, it wasn't going to take us out.
Right.
I mean,
Sure.
I mean, we're going to be fine.
I had chicken pox. I wasn't going to go get the vaccine for chicken pox after I had chicken pox. Who the hell does that? You don't do
exactly.
That. So I had it, and I had it. So you had it. You had it. You figured, how big a risk could this be, especially if it's the second time around? So I get it.
Right.
So you go into the emergency room, and they're telling you it's 77% blood ox? Is that what you said?
79, 77, somewhere in there. I don't, if I look at the records, I can tell you for sure, but I think it was 77 or 79. Bottom line was it wasn't good. And so they hooked her up to a little oxygen thing there on a wheelchair. And she was getting about, 4 liters of oxygen at the time, I think. And she felt better. She sat there and she said she felt better.
Now, when you say
so
machine,
we visited.
Are you talking about an ECMO? Were they running her blood through a machine, or were they just just oxygen up?
No, she just had a little mask on her face while she sat in the wheelchair waiting for emergency room to open up so we could go in.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing like that had occurred yet. We had just barely been in the room. They said, yeah, she's oxygen's low. So they put her in a wheelchair. They said, we're going to get you in a room, an emergency room, so they can evaluate you. We said, fine. We didn't know what it was and didn't really care. I just wanted her to get some help and figure out what was happening. So we sat in the emergency room with the emergency room nurse, who was very kind and helpful. And she said, hey, look, we got to do a COVID test. We said, yeah, fine, whatever. They did the PSR or what a PSA, whatever that's called, PCR. And she left, came back, did some more blood work, did some breathing stuff, tested her a little bit here and there. And she said, yeah, I'm pretty sure you got pneumonia. Let me talk to the doctor and we'll see about getting you a room, get you some antibiotics, some fluids, and get you out of here in the next day or two. You probably have to stay for a night, but let me talk to him first. She came back 10 minutes later and said, now that we've been in there for about an hour, she said, yep, they got a room for you. They feel pretty confident after looking at you that you've got pneumonia. And by the way, just for your own peace of mind, your COVID test came back negative.
Gotcha. Okay.
We said, we looked at each other and thought, oh, okay, but that's cool. We weren't thinking about it being COVID at the time anyway, because neither one of us, we were kind of disconnected from it, thinking that it couldn't be this. It must be some sort of a pneumonia, walking pneumonia, a hangover. Maybe your body didn't react properly and it was just recovering. So we weren't sitting at home going, oh my God, you've got COVID. We weren't thinking about that. So when she said, you just for your own peace of mind, you tested negative for COVID. Fine, great. They're going to take us to a room and treat her for pneumonia. We got in the elevator, went 4 floors up, and again, we haven't experienced this at all ever, not being in this situation. Even when I took her mother to the emergency room, it was an emergency room to an emergency room, and then they escorted me out. So I never saw anything other than that experience. And when we got to the floor where they were going to take us off, John, it was like a movie scene. It was the most empty space of a hospital wing I've ever seen. There was probably only 4 nurses standing outside in front of rooms on laptops, and then a congregation of nurses at a nurse's station where you first came in. And it felt very, very clinical science rat lab type atmosphere. It's not a very good term, but it was disturbing. It was uncomfortable. No nurses were milling around. Nobody was joking and laughing. Nobody was having conversations. Everybody was, for lack of a better term, in hazmat suits and very, like I said, there were only 4 or 5 of them and they were all standing over laptops. They took us back to a room, big double doors, opened the double doors. As we entered the room, there was, my wife referred to it as a welcoming committee. There was 6 or 7 white coats in that room. The emergency room nurse that was helping us into the room was kind of flanked by 2 of the people in that room and told that was all she was needed for. And it felt weird. Mm-hmm. It was awkward. And our eyes met, mine and hers. And she said, oh, she's here. She's just getting treated for pneumonia. And they said, okay, yeah, we got it. And they pushed her out of the room, closed the doors. And my wife and I were kind of looking at each other like, oh, that was kind of awkward. The group that was in the room consisted of a pulmonologist, I think a infectious disease person, if I remember right, a respiratory therapist, a technician, a registered nurse, an assistant, and then sort of a cop nurse, someone who kind of controlled the environment, and a hospitalist. I'd never heard of a hospitalist before. It was the first time I'd ever heard that term. I felt like after talking to him for 5 minutes, he was Satan. That
This
he
is
was
8:30. This is now 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
We get into the room. We ask a couple questions about, okay, well, great, she's got pneumonia. What are we going to do? The pulmonologist immediately comes over and introduces himself and says, hey, just, you got nothing to worry about. I've treated 4,000 patients just like you. Those are his exact words. I've treated 4,000 patients just like you. You're going to be out of here in a day or two. We'll get you some antibiotics and some oxygen and and an IV with some fluids in it. You're going to be fine. The infectious disease person said the same thing. Yeah, ditto what that guy said, and they both left the room. The hospitalist began sort of calling out plays. Like he stood over the laptop over her and said, "Get this, get that, get this, get that." And before I knew it, within about 25 minutes, they were hooking her up to an IV, which was fine. They had transferred the oxygen from the wheelchair into the wall-mounted oxygen that's provided by the hospital, which is at max it's 15 liters. She was on 5 at the time, so it was in nasal, no mask, just 5 liters of oxygen. They got her hooked up to an IV, changed her into a gown, and then they wanted to inject her into the belly with some drug, and we both looked at each other and said, "No, what are you doing?" Well, we're going to treat her for COVID. No, we both looked at, no, you're not. But first of all, if you're going to treat her for COVID, don't you give her monoclonals at this point? But if she doesn't have COVID, the girl downstairs at the emergency room said she tested negative for COVID, that this was pneumonia. Wouldn't you treat her for pneumonia instead? Mm-hmm. And why would you be giving her an injection in her stomach? I've never heard of such a thing.
That sounds like rabies or tuberculosis. But
it was bizarre.
I'm not a doctor. I have no idea. I've heard rabies shots, I think, are administered abdominally, and I don't know about tuberculosis medications. We'll have to check with one of the physicians. I'll check with one of the physicians on my show tomorrow. I'll ask them what kind of treatment goes in abdominally. We'll find that out. I'll know for you.
Yeah, it made no sense for us, and it was uncomfortable, obviously, because no one had outlined any kind of a treatment at this point. They were just all acting like she was a lab rat, basically, and these are the 5 things we're going to do. And as that unfolded, I began to ask questions like, why would you do that? What's the next treatment? If she's got pneumonia, what is your plan for treating that? And they consistently kept coming back to, no, she's got COVID, and I know this is COVID. And I would say, well, why did she test negative 4 floors down, and you're telling me she has COVID? They said, well, it's not showing up in the report. I'm going, that's impossible. It's 4 floors down. It's in your report. Why aren't you treating her based on her symptoms and not on, why are you trying to force this COVID thing on her? Now, whether she had that or not, I've never received a positive COVID test from that hospital in her 3,000 pages of medical records, not one. So our point was, look, she's got something going on here. She needs oxygen and she needs some antibiotics for sure. So let's just treat her with that and let's leave it at that. No COVID treatment. No, and they said, well, she's got COVID. I've seen it 100 times. That's what she's got. And I said, look, we're not doing this. I don't want to have this kind of deal. We just wanted her to get well. She said she's feeling fine. I looked over. I said, babe, are you okay? She said, I feel great now. She goes, let's just get the antibiotics and spend the night. And doctor said I can go home in the next day or two. I said, okay, fine. Sat down. They left. The guy came back in again, maybe 10 minutes later, and wanted to talk to me about COVID protocol. And I said, dude, you're kind of upsetting me. This is bothering me. I don't understand how 4 floors down they can say she's negative. Up here, you guys want to treat her as if she's got it. I said, so what's the protocol look like? Well, remdesivir, this and that and the other thing, and you have to give us authorization for ventilation if need be. And I go, what is going on? We've only been here for a couple of hours now. This doesn't make any sense. But my wife was, a very trusting, kind, loving person, and she believed doctors. She found the best in everybody all the time. And so she said, Curtis, just, chill out. Let's let these guys do what they're going to do. I said, well, if she's got COVID, Mr. Doctor, hospitalist, then can you give her monoclonal antibodies today? He said, no. I said, why wouldn't you give her monoclonal antibodies? That's the normal treatment around the country that people are having success with right now. Why wouldn't you do that? And he said, well, she doesn't qualify. Again, it was bizarre. I said, what do you mean qualify? Who has to qualify for medicine? I go, this isn't like, and I made a comment about, emergency use and all that kind of stuff. And he blew me off and he said, look, it's not my deal. The government shut down monoclonal distribution on January 3rd of 2022 and rationed the distribution. So now the rationing has a qualifier to go along with that. In order to get it, you have to meet certain criteria. She doesn't meet it. I asked him what the criteria was. He said he wouldn't get into it, but he would get back to me. Obviously, they never did, but I've learned what that looks like, and it's a very uncomfortable conversation. She was too healthy. I said, well, can you give her some ivermectin then? I go, I've heard, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Rogan, these guys have all gotten monoclonals and ivermectin. They're doing fine. If she's got COVID, can you do that? No, it's against hospital policy. Remdesivir is the only thing we can do. Sorry. Said, well, okay, we're not going to treat her for COVID. That's it. We're just going to take care of her pneumonia and we'll look at it tomorrow. So we sat down. I sat down with her. They left the room. I stayed for another hour or so. Me and Tam visited like we always did. And the nurse, the little assistant nurse came in and said, hey, would you like to be vaccinated? And we both just looked at each other and went, what? Is that part of your script or your pitch? I mean, what kind of bedside manner is that?
Yeah. You feel like absurd.
So it was clear that this person didn't have a lot of experience. She was relatively young, and I didn't know at the time her level of experience. Found out later that it was her first day, bad first day to be working with somebody at that level. But she walked around the backside of Tammy's bed to help position her bed differently so she could see the window and more light coming in, lots of light in Arizona. And I didn't want her locked up in this dark room while I was gone. So I asked if they could just move her bed a little bit. And she was trying to do it. She bumped the oxygen on the wall and it ramped up to 13 liters. Now, the pulmonologist had just been in there and set her at 5 and left. She bumped her all the way up to 13 accidentally, and it began to whistle, the noise from the oxygen coming from the wall. And the max on the wall is only 15. So Tammy looked at me and she goes, what'd she do? And I go, I think she just bumped the oxygen, babe. I said, can you turn that back down? And she said, yeah, I'll turn it back down. Well, she tried to turn it down. She got it down to about 10. Then she got it down to 7. She couldn't get it to fluctuate. She couldn't get it to stay stable between 7 and 10. So she left it at 10. And I said, can you get someone else to come in and fix it for her? Because it's, my wife's uncomfortable and she doesn't need that much oxygen.
Right.
The pulmonologist was just here and left it at 5. So clearly we don't need it at 13 or 10. And so she left, came back with another nurse, and this nurse, John, came in and said, basically looked at the chart, looked at the oxygen, looked at me and said, who are you? It's the first time I'd seen this nurse, and she wasn't part of the welcoming committee. I said, I'm Tammy's husband. I'm, just here to support her before I leave so she can get some rest tonight. And she said, well, you don't belong in here. So what's going on? What do you mean I don't belong in here? I've been here for 5 hours, 6 hours. I'm going to stay until she gets tired and goes to sleep. And they said, no, you're past the COVID policy is we can only be here an hour. I go, what do you mean COVID policy? She just doesn't have COVID. She was negative downstairs. We already went through this. And why do I got to leave? Well, it's against company policy, hospital policy, COVID policy. You must leave. You only get 1 hour and you have to leave. Oh, I'm not going to leave. I wasn't going to be a jerk. I wasn't being, confrontational, or I was very professional and humble, but I said, I'm not going to leave. I don't need to. I'm going to stay until she's, asleep. And I said, and besides that, I don't have a treatment plan. I go, everybody that was in there came in, said their piece and left. And there's no treatment plan. We haven't talked anything about what we're going to do to treat her pneumonia. Mm-hmm. She said, you need to leave. She wasn't kind. Very, frankly, she was confrontational. When I said for the third time I wasn't going to leave, she went out and came back with 3 security guards. Mm-hmm. The 3 security guards came in and told me I needed to leave. I said, I'm not leaving. I just need to get a clarification from the nurse or the treating physician of what her treatment plan is going to look like. And I'll be happy to head home as long as my wife's comfortable. And they said, no, you're leaving now. They tried to get physical. It wasn't a good idea. It didn't work out well for them. Not because I'm some tough guy or anything like that. It just wasn't it was not a good move on their part, and it looked really bad. I turned my phone on video. They tried to take my phone. One of the other security guards came and grabbed my arm and tried to take my phone. And this got really ugly quick. My wife looked up at me and she goes, Kurtis, you don't have to leave. Just try and get someone else to help. So I asked for someone else to come in. The head nurse came back. They ended up calling the police to come to this room to get me out. Unbelievable turn of events. We could not believe that in a few hours' time, I was now being, a prisoner. My wife was going to be a prisoner and I was being escorted out as if I was some, criminal by the cops. I couldn't believe it. I said, I'm not leaving until I talked to the nurse. The police officers were at least kind enough to make sure that the head nurse came back. And with the head nurse there and about 4 of her other nurses, they said, listen, we're not going to treat her for COVID because we don't have a COVID positive test. Okay, that's good to know.
Right.
What are you going to treat her for? Well, we're going to give her antibiotics and we're going to make sure that she's got plenty of fluid and get her some rest. And we'll go from there. That was fine. That's fine. That's all I needed to know. So I left the building. Went home. I left Tammy with her phone. I said, call me with anything or text me with whatever you need. She didn't have her charger with her. Obviously, we weren't planning on this occurring, so we weren't prepared with a bag or anything. So I went home. That night, she texted me a couple times. I texted her back. We had conversations. She said she was feeling fine. She said she had told the nurses that she was uncomfortable with that young nurse. They had her oxygen back down to 7. But she said they probably, or at 10, they said they were probably going to get it back down to 7 before the morning. And I said, well, that's great. That's good. You don't need all that. But before I left, John, on the whiteboard that you're familiar with in these rooms, says who's going to treat her, who's coming in next, who's on the next shift, what doctor's in charge, all that sort of stuff. I wrote on that whiteboard, no remdesivir, no high flow oxygen, and no sedation. And I said, and this was with the cops in the room and everything. And I put my phone number and my name. I said, you can't do any of this stuff without my permission. My wife, I said, Tammy, are you okay with that? She said, yes, of course. They were not going to do anything without talking to you. I said, perfect. Then no sedation, no high flow, and no remdesivir. And when we get more clarity, we'll figure out how we're going to do this, but I'll see you guys tomorrow. Her and I conversed over the evening. She was feeling fine. She said she had a conversation with one of the nurses and said that she didn't want that young girl back in the room, that she felt she was uncomfortable with her. So they said, yes, she won't be back. The next day came, I showed up. In this process, we didn't know a lot other than there was a time frame that you could show up. In the meantime, I wasn't sleeping. I was doing research, trying to figure out what was the best treatment for her and whether there was sort of a hangover from COVID that maybe she was suffering with, and then how we could treat that so that I at least had some thoughts about what might be in order to advocate for her properly. So when I got back there that day, you only get 1 hour. They make it in the afternoon, at least in our case, they did, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So any visits that had occurred prior to that, those people were no longer available. So if the doctor came in at 10 in the morning, guess what? He wasn't going to be available at 2 when you showed up. By then, there'd been at least 3 shift changes. If they were 8-hour intervals, it's 24 hours. There'd been at least 3 and maybe 4 by that time. So different nurses were now reading charts. None of them knew what was going on or what treatment plans, et cetera. They were just following orders. So I sat with Tammy. We talked a little bit. We visited. She said she was feeling good. She was going to eat. She had eaten breakfast. She had had a lunch. And that, she said, the doctor said, the pulmonologist said, yeah, you're going to be doing fine. We're going to get you out of here in a couple of days. You'll be, he said, at the max, 5 days, you're going to be home. You're doing great. Her oxygen was still at the 10 level. They did not take it down to 7. The next day was the 3rd day. That night when I went home, I called my oldest boy and my youngest boy. They're 34 and 31 adult males. I said, I'm uncomfortable with what's going on. I don't like the way they're treating her. I don't like that I can't talk to doctors. I don't like that she doesn't have anyone over her designating care. I said, something doesn't feel right. We need to get her out of there. So my oldest boy reached out to a few folks that we know in Arizona, and we found a physician who said he would take her under his care and put in a request for transfer. This is day 3, a request for transfer. And his treatment plan consisted of monoclonals at that time, ivermectin, high doses of vitamin C, and some other strategies that he was comfortable with and that he had treated other patients with at the time. When I got there on the 3rd day to discuss with them, to see Tammy, I asked the nurse at the time if they had received the order. She said they had. And so I asked to talk to the head charge nurse, who was just charge of the floor, not the head nurse of the hospital that was in charge of everything, but of the floor. And she said, yes, we received the request for transfer, and we were working on it. It's an internal process, but we've got it. And by the way, he's a great doctor. You're lucky to have found him, and you must have great contacts, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
I said, great. I called my son, both my boys, and told them, hey, look, they got the transfer. Hopefully this evening we're going to get a call that, she's going to be transferred. That never occurred, but I did get a call got a text from my wife that night at 2 a.m. Telling me that, don't be mad, but they put me on high flow oxygen. Yeah. You can imagine I can't respond, right?
Yeah.
Because if I don't want to get her agitated or upset or stress her out at 2 a.m, I need to be supportive. So I said, okay, I hope you're feeling, I hope it helps. Needless to say, I haven't slept. So I'm still doing research, wondering why we haven't gotten a transfer when they've had it for 8 hours. And I say, I'll see you in a few hours. She asks me to bring her comb. I come there that next morning.
Why don't we take a little break? I'm going to go heat up my coffee. I'm going to send you another invite. All right. So we are back. And you were just telling us about how overnight at 2 o'clock in the morning, they raised Tammy's oxygen level to something that you had explicitly said not to do and wrote on the whiteboard. So obviously you're livid. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I think that's where we kind of took a break. So it's 2 a.m.
And as I said,
so you're thinking, all right, so why did they do this? Why did they turn up her oxygen in the middle of the night? What's that all about?
Exactly. And I couldn't get her agitated. I wasn't there. I couldn't talk to her. I didn't want to get her upset or cause any grief at all. I wanted her to relax and just get healed, whatever she was going through. So, but this was this was now day 4, basically at 2 something in the morning. You're on to day 4. And remember, we had requested a transfer on day 3. So I'm not only frustrated over the high flow oxygen, but how come I haven't heard back yet from the transfer? And every time I would call the hospital, all I got was, it's in our internal process. And, yes, we've got it. It's internal. We've got it. So we had learned that in the mornings you could call in between a certain hour period, 9 to 11 a.m., and in the evenings between 5 and 7, you could call in and get an update on your loved one. And so I called in at 9 in the morning to find out how she was doing. They said, yeah, she was on high flow. She was on 25 liters of oxygen, which seemed absolutely insane when she had just been on 10. And so I communicated that to my boys, and they were upset as well. They were upset with why we hadn't gotten a transfer. I had sent Tammy a text and said did they give you an explanation for why the high flow? And she said, these are her words, the text message I have, I'll send it to you. But it was, I like this nurse. She was very kind. She's a good Christian woman. She said that this would help me proactively speed up my recovery. My wife is a very, again, trusting, loving human being who found good in everybody. And so when this girl used that kind of language, she was already sold that this was a good path and that she was going to follow the instructions of the doctor person sitting in front of her.
Was it a doctor? Or was
so
it a
she
nurse?
Didn't push back.
Was it a doctor or a nurse?
It was a nurse.
Okay.
It was a nurse.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I got I called in the morning, they said she was on 25 liters of oxygen. She had a good night. She was blah, blah, blah. She was doing fine. I had made a point that I was going to go talk to my boys. We had to figure out a way to speed up the process for her to be able to get transferred out. How come this wasn't occurring? What lawyer do I need to call? What judge? How do I get this moving forward? About 10:30, I get a call, and it's the hospital. And so, as you might imagine, I'm very cognizant of that number. I pick up immediately, and they say, "Mr. Bay, yes, the nurse would like you to come to the hospital." Okay. Well, I was just talked to them. They said everything was fine. What's the problem? They said, well, they just want you to come to the hospital. Okay, I'm on my way. Turned around, I raced to the hospital, got down. And remember, I was considered combative, so that every time I got to the front desk, I had to be met by somebody to be able to be cleared, basically, to see my own wife. But they met me, they did their routine. I went straight up to her floor. I walked into the nurse's station on her floor. I asked the nurse that I talked to, could you tell me what's going on? I just got a call. The doctor, it was a male nurse at this time. He said, no, I don't know anything. I was just in there. She was fine. I said, well, that's weird. They just called me. What's going on? He goes down to her room, comes out. He didn't even know she was gone. He didn't even know they'd removed her. He comes back and says, oh, well, let me check. He goes back to the nurse's station. Oh, they've got her down in ICU. Let me take you there. I'm like, what is going on? Why is she in ICU? And how come you guys is this how you operate? Are you kidding me? You didn't even know that the patient got taken out of her room? He takes me down to the ICU. I walk in and there's 4 nurses in, their scrubs. And there's a pulmonologist dude in white getup, a young guy in his 40s. And I say, what's going on? I'm scared to death. I'm very uncomfortable. Why are I'm internally saying this to you. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
I walked into the room and I said, what's going on? And they said, well, this doesn't have anything to do with COVID, but your wife needs to relax her lungs and her organs in order to speed up the process for her healing. I said, that doesn't sound right. She was just a day ago, she was fine. And this morning I checked, she was fine too. What's going on? He says a few more things to, and to be honest with you, I'm not paying much attention. I'm looking at my wife and her eyes are teared up. And this is a unique situation because at that time, John, she has no oxygen mask on. She has nasal oxygen only but they're telling me she needs to be vented.
Now, have
it doesn't even make good.
Have they given her remdesivir to your knowledge?
At the time, we didn't know anything about what they had given her other than a Z-Pack and they had mentioned a dextrometh or something. And at the time, they told me it was for inflammation. So we didn't we weren't, and you got to remember, every night I'm up, I'm just trying to figure out how to get her out. So by day 3, I've got a transfer request. That night they put her on high flow oxygen. Coincidental? I think not. The next morning, all of a sudden they've got her in ICU, telling me that she needs to be ventilated proactively. My wife is concerned. We talk. I say, why the rush? Why do we have to do it right now? And they said, no, it has to be done. It has to be done now. Why does it have to be done right now? Can I have an hour? Can I talk to my boys? Can I have my boys come here? This doesn't seem, I don't understand it. Well, her lungs are in bad shape. I said, well, can she get on a list for lung transplant? I'm just speaking, to these guys like, what, why this?
Right.
No, that's not it. This is the only thing we can do, and we need to do it right away. We need you to make a decision right away. I said, well, I can't do that. I need to talk to my sons, and I need to have a conversation with my wife.
Involved? So help us understand what it is they want to do. They want to ventilate her, basically. They want to put her on a ventilator and intubate her and put something into her. I'm not familiar with the process, so forgive me.
No, I apologize. That is exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to intubate her.
Okay.
They said that they needed to intubate her proactively so that her lungs would respond quicker, and she would be out of the hospital quicker. This is day 4.
Right. After
getting a transfer request, after getting put on high flow oxygen, all of a sudden that morning, 10:30 or 11, they've got her in ICU, and I'm being confronted with, we need to intubate her.
Now,
the only experience I had with that was a death sentence.
Are they
We
citing
had watched her
anything?
mom go through it, and that was the steps they went through. They kicked me out of the room. They said it was a death sentence. They gave her remdesivir, intubated her, and 7 days later she was dead. So
Now,
Tammy and I had a conversation. I got my boys on the phone. I asked the pulmonologist why and what were the chances of her succeeding in this. He said, I can't give you any prognosis. I'm just telling you, this is what I would do if it was my daughter, my mother, my aunt, my son. This is what I would do.
Now, is he citing the blood oxygen level? Is he telling you she's at 86 and we're not, is he citing anything? Is he showing you kind of test results?
No, it was 100% just scare tactic. You have to do it.
Do what I tell you and don't ask any questions because you couldn't possibly understand, and just do what I tell you.
Exactly. And there was a lot of pressure. Now, she had been there for probably 20 minutes with them trying to get her to do it without me.
Unreal.
The only reason I was there was because she said she wouldn't do it without me.
Thank God.
So they would have done it without me. But I got there and we have the conversation. I get my boys on the phone. They talk to their mom. We go through that exercise. I pray with her. We decide if that's what they're saying we have to do, that's what we're going to do. So we do it. That's a whole nother deal. You're left there outside the room. You cannot go in. You can only look through the window. Yeah. You get 15 minutes a day. And the only thing they do is write what her vitals are on the window. No one knows what is really going on.
It sounds to me, and I'm not a doctor, I'm just a data guy who does charts and maps, but it sounds to me from what you just told me that it sounds like he was suggesting that they put her in a medical coma when he said her organs need to relax. It sounds like he's trying to induce a medical coma. Did he mention those terms at all, or did you get the impression that that's what he was? Because that's what it sounds like to me. But I could be way off base here. I could be way off base.
No, granted, I was not of sound mind processing this. So some of the questions that I probably should have asked, I didn't. And some of the things that they may have said, I may not have processed the way I would normally. He said that this was, that she would be sedated, obviously. She'd be completely unconscious. And that this thing would be doing the breathing for her. And that this was the best way to give her lungs chance to heal. But he said specifically in front of this room and in front of me and Tammy, this has nothing to do with COVID. So we were confused and very, very, very concerned about why now, why the urgency, why did we go from her being transferred to now all of a sudden this. Again, we prayed, we talked about it. I talked to my boys and they just said, Dad, you have to do whatever you have to do. We got to get her home. So we did it. We went outside. I stood in the room. My son, my oldest boy, showed up at the last second. He didn't get to see her at that time. We went through that process together for a little bit. But again, you only get 15 minutes to visit. When they decided that I was no longer, no matter how much I was weeping or how sad I was outside her room, it was time for me to go. I had to go.
Right.
So we had to leave the building. And we were told that we could have 15 minutes to visit with her the next day. My youngest boy was in Portland, John. So I called him and said, I'm flying you here. And I flew him down that night. And we agreed that the next day, rather than me or my oldest boy go there, that he would be the one to go to visit with her during that 15-minute interval. So he went the first day and reported out every morning and every night. We called in to get her vitals. And they would tell us that she's doing well, she's stable, she's doing well. That's all we ever got. We got some reports on her blood oxygen and some things like that, but those numbers really meant nothing because we didn't understand what the good level was, what the bad level was. We knew that there was some, something we were missing, but they were basically, they treated us like we were bothering them to some degree. And so they would rattle off the vitals and then expect you to just say, okay, thank you. And like I was ordering Starbucks. But he was going there for the 15-minute intervals. On day 3, day 3 in ICU now, day 7 or 8 of her whole hospital stay now, I got a phone call, FaceTime from her phone. And there was her and him in her room. They had taken her off of the ventilator. All right. And while she had challenge talking to me because of a sore throat, she was weeping. She was happy that, we shared the rooms. I showed her that I was still had her pajamas in the bed and she could come home soon. She was thankful. They spent the rest of the afternoon there. She was in ICU, but they had changed. They let my son stay for another hour and a half or 2 hours. Then she was tired and wanted to go to bed, so she fell asleep in the afternoon. In the evening, the next morning she woke up. We called to see how she was doing. They said she was on 7 liters of oxygen. It was tremendous.
So now she's still in ICU? She's still in the ICU, but she's no longer intubated.
No.
And she's conscious.
Yes.
So you guys are like, all right, so we've turned the corner here. She's on the mend. Let's get her the hell out of the ICU and move on. Correct. Okay. And so they told us she couldn't leave, and they told her she couldn't leave. And that's a point I overlooked early on. On day 3, when they put her on high flow, she told them that, hey, my boys and my husband put in for a request for transfer. She goes, I'm nothing against you. She chuckled, I like you, but they did put in for a transfer. That nurse that said she was a Christian and wanted her on high flow oxygen and all this garbage also told her that if moving her, she could risk a heart attack. She could risk getting a heart attack. And I have a text from my wife that next day saying, because I'm pressing her to make sure they get you out of there, there's a request. You need to tell them you want to leave. She texted me back, stop. I've talked to them. They told me that I could have a heart attack. Please stop. You can talk to them when you get here. So she was very frustrated and upset with what was going on. ICU has her in recovery. They tell us that she's at 7 liters, but she has to get to 5, and she has to be able to walk the hallway on her own in order to come home. So we say, fine, but we're not going to interrupt that. We just went through terrible hell. So now the next day, they move her to CCU, critical care, and you now get 2 hours of visitation. And they have a different level of care there. And so this is now day 10.
this entire cycle from ICU, from the admission to ICU to the CCU now. We visited with her. She's doing well. We checked with the oxygen person that morning, and she says, yeah, she's at 7. She did go up to 10, but we've got her back down to 7. She should be home in a day or two. She's doing really well. That night, that morning of day 11 or 12, probably, I guess it would be day 12 at this point, but on that cycle, she called me. Not a call. You're not looking for calls at 2 o'clock in the morning in these situations. From her phone.
Yeah.
I answered, obviously, and she said, can you come and get me? I'm having a panic attack.
Okay.
And I said, they're not going to let me in.
Right.
But I will be there in a second.
Right.
The nurse, I asked her to put me on speaker. The nurse that was in her room, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, 1:48.
Yeah.
I said, can I come? And she said, no, we can't let you in. I said, can you leave me on speaker and just let me talk her through this? She had a history of panic attacks through her life, and we've been together for a long time. I know how to walk her off the ledge. She'll be fine. Her heart rate, John, was at 168. She was at 35 liters of oxygen all of a sudden.
So that's why the nurse is in the room, because the nurse's station, the machine spikes, the alarm goes off at the nurse's station at 1:30, and she's calling you because there's a nurse there, and her pulse is up high, her heart rate's racing, and so that's why there's a nurse standing there at 1:48 in the morning.
Correct.
Gotcha.
She put me on speaker. I talked to her, and I could hear in the background the oxygen at that high flow. You hear the whistle from the oxygen machines. And I could overhear another person in the room besides the nurse, and I couldn't make out what was going on. And I asked, could they, be quiet so I could work with her a little bit. I was able to get her heart rate down after about an hour or two. In the meantime, I could hear the respiratory therapist, and this is important. The respiratory therapist was arguing with her treating nurse. Her treating nurse was named Holly. It's the only person I ever got a first name of that actually treated her for more than one session. Holly was arguing with the respiratory therapist that she was having a panic attack. We were going to work through this. Look, her heart rate's going down. Her husband's talking to her. We're going to get through this. The respiratory therapist was threatening Holly with being written up because she wasn't following hospital protocol and venting her again.
Oh boy.
The respiratory therapist wanted to take her to ICU and was calling the head nurse for the floor to say that Holly is not following protocol.
And this is 2 a.m.
I could hear this.
Yeah, this is 2 o'clock.
On the phone, I could hear this.
Yep.
So I'm doing everything I can to keep her calm and get this cycle to end so that I could just get there. Mm-hmm. She was able to convince the respiratory therapist to leave the room after an argument. Probably 2 or 3 times she came back in to check, and her heart rate was down. Her breathing was steady at 20 to 25 liters that she needed during the time, and she was becoming calm. And she, at one point, she said, "I told those guys you're the only one that can help me here." Mm-hmm. And she goes, "Can you come?" And I said, "I'll be there as quickly as I can." Holly said, "I'll make an arrangement for you to be here at 7. So I got in there at 7 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And she had calmed down. She was doing okay, but she was still on 25 liters of oxygen. The pulmonologist came in. He tried to turn her on her side and patted her on her back and said, I don't know what's going on here. We're going to have to put you back up in that other room on that, meant the COVID floor. He said, on that 4th floor. And I said, "Why are we going to do that?" And he said, "Oh, it's just better treatment up there. There's, people with different training." And I'm thinking, why would that doesn't make sense. You got critical care people right here. I like Holly. I said, "Well, I'm going to go with her." And he said, "Yeah, you can go with her, but then you're going to have to leave, because, we have protocol policy on that floor." And I said, "Yeah, but we're past that." And he said, "No, you're right, probably, but that's just policy." The hospitalist was in that room at the same time, And I said, look, just write in that I'm part of her treatment plan because I can help reduce her panic. Put me in as part of her treatment plan. The nurse said she would make a note in the chart, but the hospitalist said that's nothing we can do. When I turned my back to her so I could talk privately with the hospitalist, I looked him in the eyes and said, what happened here?
Mm-hmm.
How did she go from 7 liters and going home to now 25 liters in the middle of the night and someone threatening to vent her again?
Mm-hmm.
And he said specifically, I don't know if there's a correlation, but we stopped the steroid. Yesterday was her last dose of steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what are you talking about steroids? I hadn't put together that the Dexa whatever was what the steroid he was referring to. And I said, well, get her back on it.
Mm-hmm.
That clearly had an impact on how she was feeling. I'm not a doctor, but I got a pretty good idea, cause and effect here.
Mm-hmm.
You took her off of it, she unwound, and now we're in this position. Put her back on it.
Mm-hmm.
He said, yeah, I can't say for sure that's the case, but yes, it's a 10-day protocol. It's what we do. Doesn't matter. I go, so no matter what the patient is feeling, 10 days is it. He goes, yeah, that's just the protocol. I said, so get her back on it. He said, yeah, I'm going to reapply. I go, apply? What do you mean? He goes, well, I have to submit it to the pharmacist. I have to submit it to the hospital, and then we'll get her back on it. I go, you can do it today? Yes, I'll do it today. I went up to her room with her, sat in there with her, in her room with her. During the shift changes, I would either go into the bathroom that day and wait for the shift or the nurse to come in and draw her blood or whatever, and or I would lay on the floor to be out of sight and not really be bothering anybody during that 12-hour period while she was initially put on that floor and then would go to bed that night. The next morning we woke up, she woke up and she was a ball of energy. She was my wife, all 100% back. Felt this is amazing recovery. What is going on? The pulmonologist came in. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, 7:30, 8 in the morning, came in, and the hospitalist came in, and the charge nurse on the floor came in. They said, what's going on? This doesn't add up with the data. You're doing way too well. How can this be?
Yeah.
And she said, I don't know, doc, but I'm going home. And he said, yeah, I don't get it. You should not be feeling this good. They ordered her breakfast. She got breakfast. In between there, I asked the hospitalist, are you getting her steroids? He said, yeah, they should be here today. I said, okay, how soon today? He goes, well, by the time before lunch for sure. Breakfast came, lunch came. Tammy and I were together the entire time. We played Sudoku, we played chess, we visited and joked. She said, I'm so thankful that I'm feeling this way. She goes, Kurtis, honestly, I'd lost hope. I wasn't sure I was going to come out of this, but she goes, I can't wait to get home, get back to our rituals. And she said, I hope Fauci and those guys pay for this. This is so evil. I said, yeah, babe, you're going to get home. Yeah, we're going to get you home today. I said, in fact, let's get you through today, and we'll plan tomorrow. Once you wake up, we'll be able to get you home, but let's focus on your oxygen. She agreed, yes, you're right. I just need to focus on getting my oxygen down so they'll leave me alone. Right. She was still on 25, 30 liters, depending on which nurse would come in. During this time, John, she's been in there for 14 days now. And she's had over 20 different nurses, not 10, not 5, 20. Mm-hmm. And the bulk of them, 15 or so, were traveling nurses. They weren't even from Arizona. They were from Nigeria, Italy, Spain, Germany. That's not nothing against that at all. It's a point, though, that there was clearly a reason that they were using this type of a service. When I asked the nurses where they, how long they were going to stay, I'm going to be leaving tomorrow. I've got to go to Atlanta, and then I'm going to Oregon or whatever. Wow. This was obviously something that was happening around the country, where these hospitals were using these traveling nurses. I have my own theory about why. But she was on her 21st or 22nd nurse at this point. There was no consistency or continuity of care, and there was nobody that could give you any data. When I asked them how she was doing, the one nurse from Nigeria told me that he said, listen, I'm sorry. He goes, all I can do is fill orders and give you the vitals. I don't know anything about her care.
So it sounds like everything is on the mend. It sounds like she's feeling better. And what the hell happens?
So that night, we go to bed. Again, in the room, I caress her most of the night. A couple times during the night, I can see that her body's starting to react, that she might be having a heart or a challenge with her heart. I'm watching her heart rate and everything very closely and making sure that she's not, coming apart. Mm-hmm. She does fine. I'm up all night long. I witnessed the nurses come in during the night. Everything's fine. That morning around 7 o'clock, the nurse comes in to draw her blood, and Tammy was still asleep. She tried to wake her up, and Tammy was waking up, but she was slow to wake up. And so I whispered in her ear, I said, babe, they're here to take your blood. They need to get that done. And her poor body, John, was just so riddled with, she was just she was an athletic 5'7", 130-pound woman. Her body was beat up from all the needles. Yeah. She wasn't a good candidate for giving blood anyway, and now she'd gone through this for 14 days with everything in her, neck and her everything for the ventilation, et cetera. Uh-huh. But I woke her up, whispered in her ear, and she looked at me. Her eyes were the size of quarters, and she said, "Dave, I'm having a panic attack. Please help me." And so I went through my normal routine. We began talking, and I got her to focus for a little bit. But after about 5 minutes, her heart rate was 171, and her body was just coming apart.
Holy mackerel.
The nurse on the floor came in with an ICU nurse. They put the oxygen on the wall to max, which was 15 liters, and they turned the high flow up as high as it could go, which was 40. So she was getting 55 liters of oxygen with a mask on, and she was still very challenged. Me and her talked for a few minutes through the mask, and I tried to walk her down, and they came and said, we have to get her into ICU again. She's not going to make it. Mm-hmm. And so me and her talked about it. Again, I prayed with her, and she said, okay, I need something. I need help. So I walked with her down the hallway, down the ICU, into the room, and they pulled the curtain. And they did what they had done on day 4. They ventilated her again. Mm-hmm. That night, we obviously didn't sleep as a family. The next morning, I went there to visit her, and the nurse that was taking care of her did not even know her name. He pointed to the window when I asked how she was doing. And again, you only get 15 minutes in that scenario, at least in this place. I went home that night. And I'm a mess. I haven't slept in, 10, 15 days, more than an hour. My family's a wreck. We're all, she was so healthy and there was nothing wrong. That night, again, 2 o'clock in the morning or so, I get a call from the nurse on site treating her. And she says, hey, Kurtis, we may need to do some surgery on your wife. And I said, yeah, of course. I'm freaking out. Of course, you have to do surgery. I don't care what surgery it is, but you got to do it. You don't call me and ask me, just do it.
Right.
And she says, yeah, I need to call a surgeon and get a surgeon here. And I said, how do you guys not have a surgeon? It's ICU. How do you not have somebody on staff?
Right.
She said, well, it's just whatever. She gave me some excuse. I said, what's the surgery?
Yeah.
She goes, she's got something leaking in her cavity. And at the time, I didn't know if it was a fluid or air or what. I just heard leaking cavity surgery. I said, I'm on my way. I call my boys. We get there. There's no surgeon. The nurse is trying to tell us what is going on. And they thought she might have had a perforated colon or intestine, and it was leaking into her body. Now, on the day that she was doing so well, which was the 24 hours prior, The hospitalist asked her when the last time she had a bowel movement was. She said probably 4 or 5 days. They looked at the chart. They came back and they go, yeah, we need to get you cleaned out.
Oh boy.
They never did. They didn't get her back on the steroids.
Should have blocked
They
intestine.
didn't take care of that.
She had blocked intestine and it ruptured.
They put her in there. They've got to do surgery now. The surgeon shows up and says, listen, this is what we have to do, but I don't know where I need to basically cut. I don't know what that looks like. She's laying prone, and if I turn her over, she will stop breathing. If I don't turn her over, she's going to die. So what are you going to do, doc? He said, there's nothing I can do. You guys need to figure out how you want her last little bit to be treated. That was the last time I stayed with her for the next couple of hours while my boys left and stood outside in the parking lot trying to figure out what the rest of their life was going to look like.
Oh, man. Devastating.
The sad thing about this is it's not an uncommon story. And while it's incredibly hard for me because it's my wife, most people, they don't believe it. It's not like you have a video of her being gunned down at a garage, at a grocery store or a gas station.
Yeah.
It's something that most people don't believe would ever occur. But this is happening all across the country, and there's hundreds of thousands of people that are experiencing the same thing. When you look at some of the data that you continue to bring up on a regular basis about how some of these other countries have little or no death, but yet you look at the West, UK, Europe, and us, and we have mountains of death. There's some of the consistent things that you continue to bring up in some of your talks and presentations are that these guys had early treatment. They had different maybe India is using hydroxychloroquine on a regular basis for malaria and all this stuff, but it's an incredibly impoverished nation with people living on top of each other, and yet they only have 500,000 people dead out of 1.4 billion. Beijing only has 9. Shanghai. You go down the list of some of these countries that didn't suffer the way we did, and yet we did. What's the difference? What's the variable that occurred that outlined a strategy for these people to operate in one way that had people dying at the rate that we had people dying? And some of it could be, outside of this particular protocol, there's a lot. All of a sudden, we cured everything because it's all COVID now. So there's no more flu, there's no more gunshot, there's no more heart attacks. But the truth is, this protocol, somebody created a strategy that's tied the incentives to the policy. There's too many people that had the consistency of being put in a hospital, whether they remember my wife was negative in the emergency room, but they were going to treat her for COVID. Then when I ask questions, I'm labeled combative. Then we go to get her a transfer. They push back and say she's going to get a heart attack. And the very next day, they press us to get her ventilated. This is a consistent theme with hundreds of thousands of people across this country. Then when they release her from the ventilation, they stop the steroids. And the steroids were never the kind of dosage that would actually have an impact. They were limited in terms of milligrams and the dosage that she really needed. So they never gave her treatment that. And they gave her other medicines, sedatives, and other medications that made her breathing challenged at best. So
and the fact that she didn't test positive for COVID.
No, and never 3,000 pages have I gotten a positive report, not one.
See, for me, that's the goosebump part, is that it's quite possible that she had one of these strains of influenza that devastates the lungs, because that's the signature characteristic, is what you're describing happened to Tammy's lungs is what happened with these, what happened with the 1918 H1N1 and
right.
What potentially could happen if one of these gain-of-function versions, the Kawaoka version or whatever, if one of these gain-of-function versions got out. I mean, it could be H22N17. We don't know. but we know it's going to look similar to Spanish flu. It's going to devastate the lungs. And what you're describing is a scenario where she had all of those symptoms and doesn't test positive for COVID. There's, again, I'm not a lawyer. There's civil action, and then there's criminal. I mean, there's something called criminal negligence. There's negligent manslaughter. There's criminal aspects here. She didn't need to die.
No, and that's my point. My son and I just were talking before you and I jumped on this call, and I said to him exactly that. Look, they could have easily said, your best chance is for you to go home, take vitamins, go to the urgent care, get monoclonals, whatever, because really, based on we can't help you. That would have been a good thing to say. We can't help you. You test negative downstairs. You've got some congestion and some pneumonia or whatever. You should just go home and treat it like pneumonia and do this or do that. They could have said, we can't help you. That would have been the right thing to do. But instead, they chose to convince us they could help her. And when they began that process, it lit the switch for a series of events that are consistent across this country with people, regardless of what she possibly could have taken. If she had a strain of that, very well could have. No way of knowing that today. I did do a forensic autopsy. I did do a forensic toxicology report. I'm waiting on the final results for the toxicology. That takes months sometimes. But they didn't want to do an autopsy, and I got a forensic one done. And by the way, I didn't use a state medical examiner to do it. I found a firm that would do it, third party, and use their own people. But in any case, once they decided they were going to keep her and they were going to hold me accountable for times that I could visit, they were going to go into their protocol. They decided what they were going to do to treat her or not treat her. We no longer had a say unless we could get out of there on our own. And they did everything they could in a very short period of time. We asked for a transfer on day 3. They acknowledged they received it. That night, they put her on high flow. The next morning, they're telling us that she has to be ventilated.
No, I mean, we're all listening to your story, and everybody who's hearing this is devastated. So, I mean, clearly, at minimum, it's criminal negligence. And then the ladder, we start to climb up the rungs of the ladder to negligent manslaughter, negligent homicide. There's different levels of criminality here that an attorney is going to have to hear this story and figure out what needs to be pursued. But I think you need to talk to a district attorney. I really do. From what you're describing.
I've got a call into our district attorney here in Arizona. I've had one in for about a month. We've exchanged some emails. I've exchanged emails with Ron Johnson, Wisconsin senator, doing some yeoman's work in the Senate. But these guys, let's be honest, it doesn't matter even if they, at that level, if they found something remote. They've had so many visits from high caliber doctors and infectious disease people that have given testimony. Nothing's happened as a result.
We were just talking about the attorney general, and you said you were talking to your sons and that you had reached out to a couple attorney generals and a couple senators. I think you know that I recently connected with Steve Kirsch, and we're looking at the data a little bit more thoroughly. He put me in touch with a bunch of researchers, and we're going to be getting together tomorrow to go through the data to vet everything and make sure that this is in fact what has happened here. But if my theory is correct, and I could be wrong, it's quite possible that Tammy had another respiratory virus, and that the people who were treating her had no way of knowing because the PCR test that they use doesn't have that virus in it. And so, I mean, do we even know that she didn't have tuberculosis? Was she tested for tuberculosis? If she wasn't tested for it, how do we know she didn't have it? Right? So these are the sort of things.
Yeah, these are exactly.
So from listening to your story, if I were sitting in a grand jury box, I'd be looking at this hospital administrator guy and going, "You're guilty. This is at minimum criminal negligence, at minimum." And then it's up to the prosecutors to figure out what level of criminality they feel that they can, convince the jury is legitimate here. Is this negligent manslaughter? I think there's a very good possibility that it is, but I'm not an attorney and I'm not a prosecutor. We need to hear from somebody who has that kind of
I
experience.
agree.
But
and I've spoke with Steve Kirsch and been on one of his panels with Dr. Mary Bowden and a few others too. And I appreciate the fact that we have people like yourself and him digging into this data in a different way. I'm not, I think telling Tammy's story early on was therapeutic to some degree. At this point, it's no longer what my goal is. My goal for telling Tammy's story is to, one, provide some clarity around the actions that took place within the organization and point out that this is happening all around the country. I think there's a different, if you tie in your data, like we were talking about with the differences in the way these other countries reacted to how the West reacted, if you put on your tinfoil hat for a second, somebody, my feeling is, laid out a strategy going into this thing, and it could have been as far back as September, August of 2019. I have a family member that was in China on some finance business and came back with COVID. They didn't know they had it, but that's what they came back with. So my guess is somebody at a different level was well aware of this. But my theory is that this protocol of taking the patient, regardless of what they were able to provide in terms of testing, whether she tested positive, whether it could be a different strain of the Spanish flu, whether it could be tuberculosis, they chose to treat her a specific way at the outset. They didn't give us an option. They didn't say go home. They didn't say, hey, we don't really know, nothing. They chose to operate in a particular fashion. I believe that fashion was laid out early on in someone's memo somewhere. There's a communication somewhere that says, Mr. Hospital Chain owner, here's how we're gonna treat this when it hits the States. This is the protocol. You isolate, you ventilate, you remdesivir, you whatever. This is how you do it. Here's how you're going to get reimbursed. Here's the magic for Medicaid and Medicare, how you're going to get reimbursed. And here's how we're going to isolate the nurses that push back. We're going to go with travel nurses who have no commitment to the organization and or the patient and will be gone in a week. My belief is that this memo is out there. There's no possible way that this happened by accident. There's no way a guy in New Jersey knows what's happening in Arizona and decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to treat these people exactly the same way.
You're absolutely right. In fact, there's a video. I'm going to run the clip towards the end of this. When we wrap it up, I'll run the clip so that the audience gets to hear this. There's a Dr. Cameron Kyle Sadell who was practicing in New York. And he said, there's a certain protocol that we're all treating for called ARDS, right, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome.
Yep.
And he said, but that's not what I'm seeing. These patients aren't getting oxygen. It's as if they were dropped off at base camp at Everest and they're not acclimating and the oxygen isn't. He said, it's not that their diaphragms can't pump air. They can breathe, but nothing's processing. And he was frustrated. He said that we've never seen anything like this. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, he's describing this other thing.
Right. And as I say, it very well could have, but the action they took to treat her in a specific way was an action they had planned. Didn't matter whether it was her or anybody else. I've had friends that went in after her in the hospital. They treated them exactly the same way, and they perished within 10 or 15 days.
It's the standard protocol, and that's why this doctor, when he made the video, his hair was on fire because he said, we're doing this wrong. He said, we're doing this
Right.
wrong. This is
But who
not what
decided
these
that
people
was the
need.
protocol?
I
You
don't
couldn't
know.
convince Cleveland clinics that this makes sense if they didn't think that it made sense. You couldn't convince the Methodists or anybody else around the country with these big chains, hey, this is what you need to do. Somebody had a meeting that said, hey, this is the best route to go forward with this. And if you guys agree with it, here's how we're going to compensate you because it's going to change everything. And I believe that when they went through this purging of nurses during the mandate period, I believe that they threw every nurse that pushed back and every doctor that pushed back into that so they could label them unvaccinated, whether they were or not, and be able to move in new people to treat that wouldn't push back.
Well, you got to see it. You got to witness it firsthand. It's
So
not speculation.
for me,
not, right? You got to see it.
Yep.
21 nurses.
And so if you couple your data and the chance that there's a road virus infection out there and you couple this protocol, there's a leadership meeting that occurred at a very high level for people to be able to either they know it, they agreed to it, and now they're that smoking gun is the real. Show me where that is.
You're right. And that's been, I think that part of the big frustration that you see with all the doctors. So every physician who's been trying to, swim against the stream here, to swim upstream against a narrative, whether it's Dr. Peter McCullough, Pierre Corey, the frustration is, why does nobody want to talk about therapeutic treatment?
Exactly.
And in particular, this was a huge issue in 2020 when there were no vaccines at all. And we didn't know if the vaccine was going to be there in, December, January. We didn't have any idea.
Yeah, let's not refer to them as vaccines. They don't cure anything.
Well, all right. But we know that. But the notion that they didn't want to talk about any therapeutics at all. And any therapeutic that was brought up was treated as if it was a conspiracy theory, even if the medication had been used and is, part of the WHO's recommended 100 medicines of all time, all that. Yep. And everything was treated like it was a conspiracy theory. Yep. Everything was derided. And all the physicians are going, what's going on here? Why does nobody want to treat this therapeutically? This doesn't make any sense. And so to your point that somewhere, not only did they decide on a particular protocol and a set of incentives for the hospitalists to get him engaged and all that, but it gets dark. This is a dark story.
It gets very dark. That's my point. That's why I'm willing to tell her story now if that's where we explore now, because this is a person, a family, a healthy, all of those issues that everybody has faced and might not realize what has happened with their loved one. But there's a bigger picture. This is a dark story. They drove these things for profit and vaccination, and profit being probably the overall motive. If they understood that there was a rogue virus, they looked the other way on purpose. If they were only doing it and they didn't know that, and then they were driving vaccinations, it was because there was profit incentives in doing so. And if the incentives are you ventilate for 40 grand and you get 12 grand for remdesivir and you get 14,000 when they pass in your hospital, my wife was worth $100,000 debt
to them.
To them.
And I don't want to be crass, but your hospital bills had to be at least $200,000, I'm guessing.
They're $298,000, of which insurance covered about $250 or $260.
So you're on the hook for about $40,000-$50,000, give or take.
Right. And they still got the incentive money on the back end. They got the insurance money on the front end, and they got to go back and bill Medicaid and Medicare too, because the government gave them a separate incentive package through those two vehicles if they kept them in there and treated them based on this protocol. So somewhere somebody agreed what's going to happen and how we're going to treat them. Like just like Fauci's memos about trying to hide gain of function, all of a sudden those emails come out, they're redacted, no one can really see them, but we all know what they said. There's an email, there's a memo, there's a communication out there somewhere.
Sure, I'm sure. I think we're all going to be eager to hear a follow-up when you get the results of these toxicology reports and the blood reports. I think we're all going to, be very interested in hearing what you find. It is a tragic story, and I can't thank you enough for your bravery to come forward and tell it, because as hard as it is, we're both trying to save lives right now, and it's just
Exactly.
brutal. It's brutal. It's like, you're in the midst of it, and you're trying to save lives, and it is as hard as can be. So I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Well, thank you, John. I think typically these things end up in an echo chamber. We just talk to ourselves, and I want to be able to elevate this to a different level. And your platform and your analysis is going to help do that. So I really, really appreciate it.
Can't thank you enough. And I promise you, this will not go into an echo chamber. People will watch this, and people will respond to it, and hopefully, people will realize that the advocacy that they're that they're bringing forward for their loved ones is so critical. It's so important, and that don't be bullied into letting these hospitals kill your spouse or your kid or whatever. I mean, it's just
Exactly.
absolutely ruthless. So again, I can't thank you enough. All of our hearts are with you, and let's see what we can do to get some justice here, because I think we might be able to serve some justice. So
I look forward to working with you.
all right, my friend, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. All righty.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I'm all out of hope. One more bad breath.